everybody. Welcome to episode 19 in the Mystery School podcast, we shall say, or Mystery School sessions. Today we are going to be talking about ancient lands, the lost world of Lemuria. We touched on this a number of months ago, damn near a year ago at this point. We weren't recording at that time, but we are going to be going back through all of the topics that we talked about before recording and talking about new topics, so that's why it's been a little flip-floppity. But here we are with probably one of the oldest civilizations ever written about, if I'm not mistaken. If there are any that are far older, holy crap, but this is the oldest that I know. So I don't know a whole lot about it, but Junk DNA and Miss Clara know the most in this chat, and probably more than I. They know more. I can't talk. I'm so tired. I'm sorry. It's been a long day. Basically, they know a lot, and they have done a lot more research than I have on this specific subject. Me personally, I've done more on Atlantis, and as well as Egypt and Mesopotamia and Sumeria. That is more my area, but as Junks begins to tell his story and the story of Lemuria, I always mess that up. It's Lemuria, not Lemuria. Anyways, Junk, just take it away.
Well, hello, welcome to Mystery School yet again, and thank you, Scuba, for the introduction. We're very, very excited to host this session of Mystery School this week. But before we do, Dennis and Hope, we would just like to know, through consensus, what do you know right now of Lemuria before we begin? And either of you can open your mics to speak.
Very little.
And Dennis?
Yeah, a lot about Hawaii and the history of Hawaii. I shouldn't say history, I mean the truth of Hawaii, as opposed to his story. But there's more that I could learn. My mind's always open.
Perfect. Hopefully we can patch a little bit of memory back into you. Scooby, you want to throw us through the questions and we'll just keep going that way?
That would be great.
Sorry.
What are you sorry for?
I liked how you said that.
All right. So, at what point in history did Lemuria exist on planet Earth, and where was it located?
So we have to really trace back through, not only some recorded detail and geography, but more or less the feeling, the understanding of when this civilization gave rise. And studying back their origins, it's pretty ambiguous. This time period of which they lived, because again, Lemurians had a very long lifespan, but it's somewhere in the ballpark of 50,000 BC to 300,000 BC. Anywhere within that pocket, we can look for an origin, and that would predate them with a lot of civilizations, actually most. And so that's why it's super important to kind of bypass the details of the dates, but really realize that they predated many other civilizations on the planet. That's the most important fact to that. And as to where it was located, this was a giant continent, a massive landmass in the mid to South Pacific Ocean. So we're talking between Asia, North America, and all the surrounding regions of which you find the islands today. But and Scuba, you could probably pull up a picture of Lemuria and to kind of give us better reference so we can kind of get a visual going.
Yep, just keep talking.
So yeah, within that kind of space, I actually think I have a picture. Let me see if I can send you something really quick. But yeah, within that space was this giant landmass that basically occupied a good chunk of the planet. And it's within that void or that cavity that we see in modern day, which led many to believe that, well, first off, it never existed, or, speculation through mythology that it may have sunken, or, any of the things that we hear again with Atlantis, of which we will cover in the near future. But right now we're going to be focusing primarily on Lemuria, and all you really need to know is that it predated Atlantis. It predated many other civilizations on this planet, and it existed within the Pacific Ocean. And Scuba, I just sent you that picture if you want to post that on the screen.
Yeah, I'm getting to. So this is the first one that I found. Kind of gives a little bit of a, I would say, kind of a bit of a water flow, or maybe the flow of where civilizations kind of migrated to.
Yes, I would like to add something and maybe tie this with what was expressed in Dennis at the beginning, that he knows a lot about the history of Hawaii. Because from the channels of Cryon, basically, because first it's very important to establish that the current civilization, we don't know anything about Lemuria or Atlantis. There is nothing written, no a single object has been found, nothing. Everything we know has been brought to Earth by the channelings of people like Edgar Cayce, Aurelia Lewis, Cryon, etc. That's the first thing to establish. And I would like to go to the channelings of Cryon, which I think are extremely interesting. And what he explained is that 250,000 years ago, a group of Pleiadians came to Earth. They were called the Seven Sisters. And these Pleiadians came to Earth when there were several human races already on the planet, more than 5, he said on his channelings. And they took one of those races and mixed that with their own genetic material to create a new human being that ended up being the Lemurian, common Lemurian. And that experiment, we shall say, that trial and error, took thousands of years in human time, as we know time. And the peak of this civilization was exactly what Jung was explaining, around 50,000 years ago, until the waters flooded the earth. That was what I wanted to add. And I don't know if Dennis, who knows a lot about the history of Hawaii, wants to add something.
I'm more speaking of recent history and my brief understandings of where you're going, but so far I've just been sitting here clapping my hands, feeling gratification, because it is tying a lot back together. But my knowings are more about like what they did, and I'm Native American, and how they mess with the circle of life. They killed thousands and thousands of Hawaiians to get them to adopt the English language because there was too much true history in their tongue.
You have such a very interesting perspective there, Dennis, I just want to say. But, all right, moving on to the next question. So, we've already established where it was, at what point in history did it exist. So, just kind of boiling it down and bringing it to, a bigger picture perspective. You're looking at 250,000 years, and that's before Christ. So even, the measurement of time is still construed. We say 250,000 years ago, but before Christ, that's minusing or adding another 2,000 years. Like it's very weird how that measurement of time happened. But regardless, very, very far into our past, and you're talking about a very, sophisticated race of extraterrestrials just plucking a little primitive set of people and advancing them and accelerating them to a very, very high level very, very quickly. And it's fascinating. So what was daily life like for the Lemurian? How did this society function as a whole? So, what did they do? Do they have jobs? How did they handle waste? Did they have no waste? Did they, how did they live? That's a very curious thing that I would personally have.
Yeah, well, yeah. Hold on. We're good? Testing. Okay. Daily life for the Lemurian was very, very fascinating. And before we go into that, I think we can start to gain a visual, because a lot of people are visual learners. Just as Clara said, imbued with Pleiadian DNA, and that's what gave them that kind of opening of the pineal, opening of the mind, of their consciousness. So while they were more or less aesthetically primitive, what was interesting is that Claire and I did a QHT in these past few months, and she opened me up to a point where I recalled I had a past life regression as a Lemurian, and I was able to see subjectively what was happening in society, what my role was, and how I actually played it out. So I think, just as we said, a lot of this information about Lemuria, Lemurians, are going to come from within us. So I think that's the most authentic aspect that I can bring, is my own DNA heritage outward and explain that situation as it was. And I remember as I went in, again, a very lush ecosystem, meaning that they were basically coexisting with not only with one another, but with nature. There was a very foundational rooting of respect, and they had limitedly realistically no carbon footprint, because they were working with nature. They were more natural beings. There were no giant concrete buildings or metals of any sort. It was all nature built by nature using the elements. So very much connected to nature, and we're focused on building community, basically instinctively serving others by teaching, guiding, and loving the youth, loving the community as a whole, and building up that servitude to others by any means necessary. And what I found was, and this is kind of funny where I am right now in my current lifetime, is I was a teacher. I was a sort of youth teacher where I would show the way to these younglings, as they were said, and show them what to do, how to go, how to commune with nature, and to really involve yourself in the spiritual development process. And so it's fascinating. I did that through my youth into my early adulthood, and eventually went on to begin what they would be considered as a leave of passage, which is basically to go on my own, fully embrace solitude with nature, build my own house within the trees, of course, that's where I did it, and move on towards that, because they had this energy of progression. It was always evolving into something new. They wanted to master themselves. So aside from that, that life path of self-mastery and consolidation with nature, they were primarily vegetarians from what I got my experience with, which means a non-karmic food stuff that didn't really involve any type of murder, killing of any sort. They were very attuned to what they needed from the plants, what the plants provided, and how to grow, how to cultivate that harvest within the soil. So, and you have to realize that as their continent was situated mid-Pacific Ocean, all of the soil was very fertile. So they were able to actually get a lot of crops set up and stuff like that, which I saw in my regression, just lots of garden-esque places or regions of the island that it was on. So yeah, again, it's almost incomparable to today's society, as far as get a job, go do this. Everything was basically volunteer. There was a communal aspect. Everybody shared everything. Part of my regression took me around this fire, kind of like a dining area, but they had like a local fire, and everybody sat around and they talked to each other and they sang and they told stories and whatnot. So it wasn't that you needed to fend for yourself or try to earn anything. Everything was freely given because it was already earned just by being a good citizen. And I want to pass the microphone now to Clara, because she had direct interaction with the regression while I was under and may know a little bit more.
You guys good?
I'm here. Okay. Yes, I was explaining that John covered most of the hypnosis session, but I want to bring the perspective of a book I read. It's called The Women of Lemuria. This book is very important because it explains about how balanced was a society between the right hemisphere of the brain and the left hemisphere of the brain, and how was that represented in the society at large, meaning what were the roles of women, what were the roles of men. It's extremely interesting because it explains, for example, that women were in charge of education of all the children, that they were in charge of educating the children till they were 13 years of age, and then starting from that point, the girls remained with the women and the boys went with the men, and the men were, the teachers in the arts of the ocean and the arts of providing food, because the men were in charge of providing the food for all the villagers. The women were shamans and teachers. And they created this extremely balanced society that lived in harmony for thousands and thousands of years, according to this book. And also what is extremely interesting is the fact that they explained that the Pleiadians remained on the planet supervising the creation throughout the whole existence of Lemuria. And this book is extremely interesting. If you want to get it or read it, I totally recommend it because it has absolutely details of the Lemurian life and the daily life of the Lemurians back then.
That's super cool. So as it turns out, they essentially, I don't want to be like this, but they kind of lived like beach tree people. But
you know what I imagine? I sense that the movie, yes, The Way of Water, it absolutely pictured the kind of environment that Jung described during his hypnosis session. Absolutely, 100%.
Yeah, okay. I can see that. 100%. And, I wouldn't be shocked if James Cameron modeled it off of, different things that he knows about Lemuria and Atlantis and all of that. So, yeah, that's a very good point. One question that I have directly from your hypnosis session would be, and it would be very simple. How did you manage waste? Because I feel like waste in any civilization has been a problem. I know over time it, of course, gets obliterated and degrades and, Earth just kind of takes over. But for each civilization, though, there has always been an issue with waste at some point.
Well, I want to take that question because this book, these channelings by Cryon describe 100% that the Lemurian society was a society that was in absolutely oneness with the environment. That means they were not like us, that we open the closet and we have like 13 pair of dresses, 14 jackets, 5 or 6 pair of sneakers. No, they just had what they needed. Therefore, they didn't create waste. And second, they were fishermen and they took from the ocean just what they needed to eat. Therefore, they didn't create waste. And whatever was left was used to nurture the soil or convert whatever waste was left into something useful. Everything was recycled. So they were not consumers, crazy consumers like we are.
And I think you very much hit that right on the nail with all of the shopping and all of that. I didn't want to just come out and say, what were their clothes like? I that was a dumb question, but you hit it right on the nail. So thank you, Clara. What density did they live in, and how evolved was the collective consciousness of planet Earth at that time?
So this is going to be a question that even pertains to our own current existence here on Earth, which is, on this planet, as it is, we are within the third dimension. However, there is a vibration that you can embody to accelerate or even elevate from this earthbound frequency. And that's basically what they were involved with. So when Clara was talking about fifth density kind of influence, that's what we're seeping into. It's all about how you hold yourself and how, because you can have habitation on a third density planet and still be more evolved than the surrounding region. It basically all involves your own consciousness. So when we talk about the collective consciousness, specifically with Lemuria, we're talking about an elevated group of individuals, an elevated group of souls who aren't necessarily bound by the unconsciousness that we see today. And that's why we like to say that they were more spiritually evolved than less spiritually evolved. And it's fascinating too, because the Lemurians, as many people would come to find out as you dive down this rabbit hole, were actively working with the cetaceans of the planet, the whales and dolphins. And the whales and dolphins are the frequency bearers. They're the ones that boost the planet's vibration for all those who hear, even when working with Gaia herself. So the fact that the Lemurians had a personal relationship with them means that they were being boosted and tuned just through that interaction. And so that's what really kind of amplified that servitude and that growth within them as a collective consciousness. But it was a very different place to be. Again, intention was everything. So they didn't have TV to distract them or, nonsensical games. They were really, really in tune with the flow of nature and were always focused on the goal. The objective never really changed. It just, if anything, enhanced as they got closer and matured and really found their oneness with unity. So pretty highly evolved. And Claire, you want to speak on this one? Yeah, hold on a second.
Also, to understand how evolved they were and the 5D consciousness is all the perspective of how you see life and how you interact with the world. That's what this type of consciousness means. They were, of course, in the third density, like we're speaking, but they were living in 5D consciousness, which means they were highly evolved in arts like related to the clairs, for example, to the pineal gland, clairvoyant, clairaudience, claircognizance, everything, clairsentient. They were communicating telepathically. They were capable of becoming more energy than material. That's everything you can achieve when you reach the 5D consciousness. So it's very interesting because we have to understand that this society was 100% dedicated to the evolution through spirituality, not technology. So they had everything built around the spiritual development of humankind in that moment. Even the teachings, the schools that they had for children that had been described through channelings were all around converting these children in highly evolved spiritual beings at a very young age.
All right, so could we say they essentially lived in almost a 5D type of lifestyle?
As close as you can get. As close as you can get. Are we good now? Testing. Yeah, as close as you can get into this aspect of reality, they basically achieved. I would say they were slightly parallel to the Ascended Masters. Of course, the Ascended Masters reached full transcendence, but as a collective and as a society goes, they were very synchronized with one another, and that's what really brought them to that stasis.
All right. was there any notion of spirituality? And if so, any practices to cultivate this awareness? So what I mean by this is we already know, and it's already been established before, that of course they were very spiritual, but what were some of the very basic things that they did to really elevate, that we could, say are Lemurian teachings versus Atlantean teachings?
Yeah, so this is where it gets fascinating, because in my regression, I remember I was in the process of bringing this group of children to one of the pyramidal structures, which was crystalline. So we're not talking stones or anything as we see with Egypt or anything like that. This was a crystalline construction, and leading them in, and I was intuitively told that this was an initiatory process. So I would say pyramidal initiation, as far as basically birthing the initiate and teaching the kids all they needed to know. Of course, each of them had a Lemurian quartz crystal. And if you don't know anything about Lemurian quartz crystals, they were very prominent in Lemuria because they acted as their own technology. It was basically assigned to them. Each Lemurian had their own distinct crystal, and it did a lot of functions that they held in their daily life. So this was basically assigned to them, presumably at birth. And from that moment on, they carry it with them through their teachings as they grow. And then taking the Lemurian with them, I sent them off into the pyramid. So from that moment on, again, we learned from such texts and channelings as Law of One that these are absolute chambers for alignment. So we can also talk about sound healing in these isolation chambers, tuning, alignment, again, with the Lemurian integration, that's crystalline integration. Obviously, meditation, a huge one. Grounding, as always. They didn't really wear shoes. It was always foot to soil. And most importantly, their interaction with intelligent infinity. And if you don't know what that is, that's basically the cosmic energy of the universe, emanating from Source or the One Infinite Creator. And we all have our ability to tap into this energy when we reach a state of euphoria, inspiration, ecstasy. All of these are inspiration. All of these are interactions with intelligent infinity. So with their clear vessels, their attuned minds and bodies, they were very easily accessible to interfacing this energy. So with all of that, and I'm going to let Clara take over in a moment, pushed into the package of spiritual growth, they were able to cultivate even more self-awareness because they were on the path of knowing themselves. And that is the most powerful thing, because it allowed their DNA to fully unlock as we are in the process of unlocking ours, and therefore giving them that multi-dimensionality to them, which was very profound and also very confirming, which is why there was no shadow of a doubt. There was no censorship. Everything that they were tapping into on a natural basis was collectively known. There were no secrets. Again, telepathic relay, and just very, very advanced. So I'm going to pass the microphone to Clara really quick.
Yes, and most beautiful aspect that I've known about Lemuria is very, very related, for example, to the native communities, because Lemurians had a ritual for everything. Birth had a ritual. Motherhood had a ritual. Reaching puberty had a ritual. Everything was done around rituals, mostly around the ocean. For example, they venerated the wind, the water, the volcanoes. All nature was absolutely revered by them. So this was an extremely spiritual society. And as Jung was explaining, in the 5D consciousness, there are no secrets, so there's no need to please anybody or choose your words before speaking to someone because that person is going to say or feel something about you that could be wrong. No, because they didn't need to do that. And it is extremely important to understand is that they were absolutely taken care by the Pleiadians who remain here on the planet all the time, rejuvenating their bodies at a extremely high advanced technology that they built around the islands of Hawaii that was called the Temple of Rejuvenation, where they were able to restart their physical bodies in order to remain here for thousands and thousands of years. And some Lemurians that were very advanced spiritually received the blessing of accessing this Temple of Rejuvenation. So this was a different world, absolutely.
That's fascinating. That honestly makes me want to get a very special crystal and walk through the Giza pyramids. See what happens. That's funny.
That actually happened for us.
Yeah? Did anything?
Okay, I'm good. Yeah, Claire and I went to Giza, and we sat in front of the Great Pyramid with our Lemurians, and you can sense that bringing these crystals back, it has this memory, almost like how we have muscle memory, that we started to feel like a magnetic pull. And I told Claire I heard static in the air, and it was so beautiful because you feel drawn in, but also rejuvenated because it's constantly producing toroidal energy. So you're sitting within that sphere of influence and just getting recharged. And I could, it's like going back in time and remembering all of these ancient practices that have since been lost. And it was always about crystalline integration, structuring, and rejuvenation of the physical vessel, which Clara said. So I highly recommend, if you haven't been to Egypt, definitely go. Being inside, being outside, it doesn't matter. Just being within that sphere of influence is all that matters. But a very powerful experience indeed.
Very cool. So I know we've talked about pretty much them being perfection and, not having any sort of flaws or any type of polarization, but was there, what was the collective polarization, if there was any? And was there any societal distortions besides, the cataclysm? But, what was there any interpersonal things? I wouldn't necessarily say on a big grand scale, but, internally, did any of them go through flaws or different things? Like, because from what you guys are saying, I mean, it feels like these beings were essentially perfect, were essentially Christ-like.
Yeah, so basically, to answer the question in plain words, they were polarized towards serving others. So a very positive polarization. And this spanned for the entirety of Lemuria because, again, just as Clara mentioned, the ceremonial rituals that they had upon birth wasn't to indoctrinate a child into any distorted viewpoint of what society was or what they were going to be building into, but rather to teach them the truth right from the first day and to keep cultivating that awareness. And so they spent their lives dedicated to spiritual advancement, pretty much, and just interconnectivity with one another and to the infinite creator. So I would say if you were talking about Christ consciousness, yeah, they could be definitely channeling that in because they were most certainly pure of heart. They did have ego, because when you can't not have ego as a human being, but at the same time, they didn't let that ego overtake the collective good. So they were really balanced with knowing that they were having a temporary human experience whilst also embracing the experience itself. So, and again, they had, the whole society was infused with this language akin to light language, which is why you can see that in a lot of different channelers nowadays. It was very symbolic, lots of different energies that were infused into not only greetings, but also the ceremonial settings as well. So, with a lack of any concept of killing, murder, or self-service, they were primarily focused on just benefiting their fellow brother or sister. And it was a very beautiful society. And I hope that I have more regressions because it was absolutely moving. And I'll let Clara jump in really quick. Hold on.
Yes, thank you. I just want to point out something that is very important. And Atlantis was a colony of Lemuria. They coexisted at the same time, and they were not separated. It was everything under this viewpoint that we're speaking about. And well, that's another conversation, what happened, with the society that ended up with the global destruction. But yes, they coexisted at the same time, and distortions were worked. And some channelers have expressed that the humans that needed to work on themselves were apparently sent to locations where they were guided by spiritual coaches like we understand nowadays, and they work on themselves until they reach harmony and balance like their fellow brothers and sisters. Because of course we cannot label Lemuria as a perfect society, because that was not the case. We all come here to the planet, we are with learning lessons. Some souls that incarnated in those moments were souls originally from Earth, others were not, others were coming from systems that were destroyed and they needed to heal all those memories. So this was a school for souls that started to live here on planet Earth. And of course, there were some work to be done for some of them.
Okay, so that's really cool. Good to know that they weren't painted as 100% perfect. It's nice to see that even a society as great as Lemuria still had, on its base fundamental level, individuals had things that they dealt with in daily life. And, they went through their emotions in a different way and reacted about them in a different way because the foundations were different, but they still went through these problems. And that's, it's very important for us to understand that to some level they are still human and they are still living life just like we are. So,
yes. And if we understand too that human aspect was precisely what created the need to hear other words, to listen to other voices, to follow other paths, to be led by ego and ended up in the destruction, we will understand that there was a lot work to be done by some of those souls, that there was not perfection because precisely of the human aspect. We need to understand that those humans had a genetic part of the Pleiadians, but they were not Pleiadians. They were humans. Okay, it's very important.
My mistake. I'm sorry. So, what caused the fall of this ancient civilization, and how was it not foreseen by, them or even their extraterrestrial guardians, we shall say?
So to understand the demise of Lemuria, we have to zoom out a little bit and look at Gaia herself. This is a lot of information gained from the channel text of Law of One, of which the raw collective consciousness came to humanity with this wisdom. So if you haven't read Law of One, I highly recommend it. It'll change your life. But in the context of Lemuria, basically, this civilization was at the end of a major cycle, which, for anybody who doesn't know, is about 25,000 years. And when these things happen, again, this is almost anticipating an ascension event. So we talk about ascension a lot, and we ask, oh, what is this? It's basically the transcendence of consciousness from one density to another. And this is something that happens very regularly. And it's all cyclical, by the way. So when we talk about that, I think it's also great to zoom out even further and take a look at a megacycle, which is a combination of 3 major cycles, equating 75,000 years. And at this point in a planetary's history, every life form on the planet undergoes an ascension event, because at that point in time, whether it's relocation to another planetary consciousness or it's anything of the other sort, the planet needs time to heal and reset. And this is very fascinating too, because you can kind of look at the Venusian history and Mars and everything of the sort, and how that kind of correlates to where we are right now as a civilization. But going back to the end of this major cycle of 25,000 years ago, the Law of One states that around 53,000 years ago, there was a cataclysm, a deluge event, of which the entire continent sank. And the reason for this isn't necessarily of Lemurian activity, but rather of the planetary changes, because there were shifts in the tectonic plates of the planet, and it caused, a almost instantaneous deluge that was only sensed upon the rumbling and the effect of the cause. So it's not that the Lemurians did anything to catalyze the cataclysm or anything wrong of the sort. This was just part of the cyclical process of the planet. So basically, in this moment, and again, this is where I had my very first regression, and it was probably the most traumatic regression I've ever had, and it was the most spontaneous. I was in a group guided bilocation meditation, and immediately stripped from that experience, I jumped back into this Akashic memory where I was on one of these islands, and I felt this unnerving shaking of the earth, and it was so loud, and you could just feel something so wrong occurring. You saw the animals like just taking off in all directions, trees falling, and then, not to get too explicit, but everything just started to die. Everything started to disappear under these waves that just swallowed it whole. And afterwards, just looking out to a unlimited horizon over the sea, I just felt ultimate sadness in my heart. And I remember just being completely brought to my knees from the experience and being on the outskirts. And of course, this kind of ties into the next questions, so I'll wait for the end of that brief. But the fall of Lemuria was of no fault of the Lemurians. It was a planetary shift, a cyclical procession, something that happened because it needed to, not because it was triggered by anybody or anything. And these changes, unfortunately, changed the map forever, and as the continent sank, the things that survived were the peaks of these mountains that they had, because there was a very lush and dynamic terrain, of which was Lemuria. And so the highest elevated peaks of Lemuria became the foundations of these islands that we see, Tonga, Hawaii, all across the board. We see, Easter Island, and it's just profound to think that once there was this, unlimited landscape, but has since become subterranean. And when looking at it now, you can kind of see, shifting into modern day, that a lot of these islands have similar descent, national descent. How do they all connect if they're islands, if they had no contact with one another? And the answer is they share a common ancestry. They have that unified family heredity that goes throughout their DNA and also maintains that memory of what was.
And also to add to that question is that the masters, the highly evolved people that existed, they knew that what was going on and what was coming, because we have to understand they were clairvoyants. So they had the ability to foresee what was going to happen. That's why the sacred knowledge was taken elsewhere to be secured and guarded. And this is information that had been transmitted by the ascended masters through channeling. So yes, they knew what was going on with the land.
Okay. Were there any survivors of this cataclysm, and do we know where they resettled?
So this is where it gets very interesting. In my regression, again, I was off to the coastline, so I was pretty much safe from the major events that occurred. And it was within that time, just as Clara mentioned, that few were quite aware of what was happening. And, it was mostly the leaders, the men, that took charge and took factions. But there were essentially lifeboats that prevented, full wipeout of this civilization, mainly on the coastal lines. So when we're talking about survivors, there were survivors, but they took refuge on the surrounding continents. So the ones further west went to Russia and those surrounding regions, India. And then the ones on the east made refuge on the Americas and just different places that were accessible at that time. And what's fascinating is that the Lemurians, having settled in the Americas, actually became the North Americans, the American Indians, as well as some of the ones that terraformed the lands of South America. So just as Clara was mentioning, the teachings were preserved, the wisdoms were preserved, and all of that kind of cultivated this drive to try to rebuild, resettle, reestablish. And one of these places which was very successful in doing so was known as the city of Telos, which is located in Mount Shasta, in which the refugees found refuge in the mountain itself. And there's many stories of that, and I'm sure that's a whole nother mystery school we can dive into. But what you need to know is that, yes, there were survivors, and they carried with them the wisdom of the lands, and it wasn't lost. Nothing's lost, of course, through Akashic memory, but on a physical level, all of the memory was retained and transferred through the generations, which is a huge reason why you see the American Indians so spiritual. They weren't just a, savage group of individuals. They were actually very tuned into nature and following the same principles of Lemuria. They followed the guides, their ancestors' teachings, spirituality to a sense, and that's how that lineage carried on. And for me, having survived the cataclysm myself in the regression, I do remember that the energy was transferred. I had this momentary experience where when I was on my knees, just kind of sobbing and taking in the whole situation, I saw their light bodies of the deceased, the recently deceased, emerge from the ocean 2 by 2, and they laid their Lemurian quartz down by my feet. And what that was symbolic of was that the memory and the energy retains and it carries on, and that the teachings that were bestowed upon the Lemurians wasn't to die that day, it was to live on again. And as we see throughout history, so it did. But much of it was lost. So it's absolutely fascinating, but it wasn't a complete wipeout. We saw survivors of this cataclysm.
Would you say you're a survivor?
Yeah. From, all right, hold on. Echo. Check. From who I was, yes. I was I would say sub 30. I was within my youthful state. But yeah, I definitely said I was, and it's possible that because of that heritage within my my DNA, that's why I've come back to this planet to serve and try to restore that same level of collective consciousness, which is something, if anybody knows me, I'm actively attempting to do. I'm actively serving others and growing in my own spiritual self-mastery. But Lemuria was definitely one of my lifetimes, and having the confirmation of 2 regressions, I await the third, because I know the more we grow and the more we evolve here on the planet, the more we reveal the Akash, and we get to remember again and again. So, yeah.
That's awesome. Does anybody have any questions for Clara and Junk?
Prior to the cataclysm, what was their lifespan as what we might think in years?
So again, their telomeres, the end caps on the DNA weren't limited. They had expansive lifespans. And just as Clara said, from Pleiadians, they were gifted technologies to extend the lifespan. So I would say anywhere upwards of 200, 300 years. And it's hard to say. It really is hard to say. And it's also important to mention that there probably were, as I didn't see in my my regressions, depending on my perspective, but there were giants of Lemuria. That was definitely a thing. So it's important to just kind of keep this with an open mind and realize that you aren't limited by your 60, 70 years. It's what's been done to your DNA, your genetic material, that has kept you within this pocket. Many life forms throughout the universe have extended lifespans, and that's for the pursuit of knowledge and self-growth. So until we can fully reform that ourselves and undo the damage that has been bestowed upon us, we will continue to face sub-100-year lifespans. But it is fascinating to think what you can get done with 200, 300, 1,000 years on this planet.
And my other question is, Junk, are you documenting your regressions for kind of perhaps historical purposes? I know it's subjective, but needless to say, it could be very important.
I appreciate that, Hope. Yeah, the first one, that was almost a spontaneous regression. Again, I never asked for it. It just threw me into there. That one's saved in my memory. And I don't ever have to write it down to recount it. It's so vividly imprinted on my mind that it'll always be the same vivid nature that I saw it as. As for the secondary regression of my life in Lemuria, that was done as a QHHT session led by Clara, of course, and it is documented in voice. I was speaking it aloud while under the influence, per se, and it was very profound to hear my own words recount this memory back, and so I have that noted. And who knows, there might be future avenues for documentation, but I do appreciate that. Thank you. Dennis, do you have any questions?
First of all, I want to say, boo-yah. Very well done and put together. Basically, you kind of rounded out all my questions, except for one thing I'm curious about more than as a question is, we have like all the Titans frozen in time, and some of them it's like so blatantly obvious that 1 second they were fine, or maybe in the heat of battle in a few cases, and then the next second they were frozen in time. And time being, I hate using that word too, but
yeah, can you rephrase that question? Sorry, we're trying to figure out what you're referring to.
well, we can look all over the all over the planet, all over the surface, and find all this evidence of giants, titans, frozen in time. And when in our history did that happen? History, gosh, there's another word. When in our truth did that happen? Right? Because there's a lot of talk of it in the oral histories, especially of my people. Right? So
Yeah, okay, I understand what you're saying now. And we've done, Scuba, I believe we've done a Giants episode on Mystery School. If not, we're going to have to double back on that. But yeah, they were very widely populating the Earth at that time. And again, this was more or less just a response to the nature, to the elements, to what was provided genetically. But we've seen them since fade out simply due to censorship, to overflooding of diversity. And the ones that really remain have various clues that unlock their secrecy. And one of those clues was Lemuria, because that's the thing, is our trace, our carbon footprint as, a skeleton can be found in many different regions on this planet. And at one point, Lemuria did expand outwards. So we have to see how the influence of giant presence, as you call them, titans, did influence society. But I think ultimately they faded out because they needed to, and that the planet was actually moving into a different phase of existence that didn't involve many of them populating the Earth.
Yes, as a matter of fact, in the channelings of Cryon, he speaks about how these other races of humans that coexisted disappeared by natural means. because, as John is explaining, they didn't need to move forward in the process of evolution.
Some of these people, some of these massive things were frozen in time, though. Literally frozen. 1 second they were alive, the next second they were frozen in time. They were gone. That's some kind of cataclysmic event, right?
Yeah, there
That
were
would be
different cataclysms throughout history as we know it, of course. And Lemuria being one of the most ancient ones. And it all kind of falls, if not at the fault of human ignorance, then it's planetary coincidence or happenstance. Because you're right, these things happen and the planet resets in a way, and it kind of freezes life with it. And the giants were very evolved. I mean, as you've seen, many of them with elongated skulls. Scuba, that's another one I want to touch on if we can. It's just a fascinating conversation, and Dennis, we thank you. We're definitely going to dedicate an episode to that to answer all those questions. Okay.
awesome. I please don't feel pressured by me. I loved your whole presentation. I really did.
Oh, we appreciate that. Thank you. Marie, Birdcat, you guys have any questions about Lemuria after the presentation?
Scuba, thanks, they're on mute.
Hi, am I on?
Yeah, we can hear you.
I got on late, so I missed some of it. Unfortunately, I had an errand to run, but it's really interesting what I did catch so far. And I was wondering, you guys' thoughts on the possible overlap or where the timelines are as far as Atlanteans and Lemurians. Were they contemporaries of each other, or possibly the same, or cousins, or completely different times? Do we have any thoughts on that?
Well, thank you for the question. And we kind of touched on that during the presentation, but I will gladly answer that Atlantis was a colony of Lemuria. They coexisted as Atlantis was developed during the time of Lemuria. Okay, they were not like two separate countries as we understand nowadays from the duality that we lived in, but Atlantis coexisted with Lemuria. Lemuria was first, and Atlantis appeared much later, because as we explained before, the development of Lemuria took thousands of years as we humans understand time, understand from the high perspective that time does not exist. It's an investment of energy, but it took a lot of energy for the Pleiadians to finally be satisfied with the society as they created Lemurians with their own genetic.
Yeah, and I think.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, thank you. I wanted to just double in on that really quick and also say, as a prelude to our Atlantis episode, that initially Atlantis upkept the same Lemurian qualities and teachings. And that's what allowed Atlantis to grow to a great civilization. I'm not going to spoil the end, but all I'm going to say is that it met a similar fate to Lemuria, but in a different regard. So it's about just realizing that Lemurian teachings, the Lemurian presence or way of life kept on in many different tribes, many civilizations all across the planet, and especially in the Native American culture. As you can see, if you study any, there are many, many parallels that correlate to what Lemurians were all about.
Thank you for that. One more quick question. You guys had touched on Mount Shasta a bit, and there being a survivors colony there. I grew up in California, and I mean, anyone who's spent time in Northern California, and whether they have or not, they've heard stories about Shasta and it being this kind of, hub of UFO activity and mystical shamanic presence. In the 90s, I had some friends that lived in Redding, and they saw quite some interesting things up over Shasta that almost seemed like it was putting on a laser light show of an alien or antediluvian, perhaps, civilization, giving some kind of a visual display in the sky of survival and being out there. So I never really knew if they were just really high when they saw it or if they actually saw that. I don't know. But, one thing is for sure is that is a huge area for activity. And I'm just wondering if I assume there's probably a connection between UFOs and the survivor colonies there. And any thoughts on that?
Well, that's a wonderful question. I will gladly answer that because it's one of my favorite subjects. As channeled by Aurelia Lewis-Jones, there is a colony of survivors from Lemuria in Telos, which is a subterranean city. Okay, 25,000 Lemurians were able to reach that part of Northern California, and they made their home there. And they evolved for quite a while until they reached again the 5D consciousness. And this is a very evolved society that is in contact with other planetary systems, where other races outside planet Earth. As a matter of fact, High Priest of Telos, Adama, is not only working with the intraterrestrial city, with the subterranean civilization, but also he is a diplomatic for galactic contacts in the name of planet Earth. And Mount Shasta itself is recognized as one of the most important energy centers of this planet, as it is the portal of the energies coming from the galactic center to planet Earth. So Aurelia Lewis explaining in her channelings that some of the mountains of this planet form a grid to spread all the energy that is coming through Mount Shasta to planet Earth all around the globe. So this is a very, very important point for the planet. Of course, there are a lot of activities related to galactic communication, starships, not only from nowadays, but they are reported even from the times previous, the arrival of the colonies. So yes, it's a fascinating subject, and as written in her books, these Telosians are able to become invisible. They can be material for us to see them, but also they can become invisible at will. That's one of the characteristics of they have developed as 5D beings. It's beautiful questions. And also there is said that there is a crystalline city over Mount Shasta that is called the City of the Seven Rays, that only exists in the etheric realm, and this city will be able for humans to see it when we reach that vibration, because for us as we are now is absolutely invisible.
I would also like to add too, because part of your question was about the UFO connection with Shasta. So just as Clara said, the civilization that currently resides there within the mountain itself, it's not necessarily outwards, but there is a lot of UFO activity. And no, these speculations weren't high. I actually have proof that this is a real occurrence, and I'm going to send it to Scuba right now. Scuba, if you want to pull this up on screen. This is a beautiful happening of a process called the CE5, which is Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind, a procedure that was developed by Dr. Stephen Greer. And in the video you're about to watch, this was actually in Mount Shasta itself performing this procedure. And just as you said, just as you mentioned through the accounts, that's exactly what we're going to see in just a few moments. So, Scuba, if you're able to, definitely pull that up. I think it'd be a little confirmation that we can do.
Hey guys, sorry. Are there any final questions before we move on to our usual final topic of the night?
Yeah, Scuba, can you pull up the video really quick?
Oh, you sent me one?
It's the one that correlates with the Shasta UFO sighting I was just talking about.
Oh, yeah, of course.
And just to add, I don't discount any of this. I just wasn't sure if these two particular friends may have not been high when they saw it. That's not to say that they didn't see anything and that it doesn't happen.
I know, I just wanted to give you this little confirmation.
Thank you. I appreciate it very much.
So what is this?
This is a CE5 performed in Mount Shasta.
Gotcha. Okay. Wonderful. All right. So I am going to get us on our sun radar. Have you checked out the Schumann?
Yeah, pretty nominal right now. We've had a few in the 20s. Nothing so significant, but I do have two pictures that are interesting I'll send to you.
Okay. Roughly a quiet week. Had a couple flares on the other side of the planet, but nothing too major. Got a little bit of auroras. But as you can see, they're staying very much highly in the South Pole. We had one solar flare on the 29th, one little CME there, but it was in no way going to hit Earth. It will probably create some geostorms in the next week or so as it passes around, but yeah. Overall, things have just been relatively quiet. Other than what's been going on in our world, I think that's very telling that the sun's being quiet, but the world is slowly on fire. And then we got this. This was yesterday. Like I said, this was in no way directed at Earth, so there was nothing to worry about, but it's still nice to note and to show you the patterns. They're only going to get more intense.
Yeah, that was a preview of a comet, so it shows the difference between natural space phenomena versus what we find on the radar. Just thought that'd be important to include.
All right, everybody. I don't have anything else to say. Junk, do you?
Yeah, I just wanted to openly invite everybody here to my first session of Know Thyself. It's going to be a brand new series in which I dive deep into channeled work, and we dive into topics that you guys would love to talk about, similar to Mystery School. And it's free. We have 4 sessions coming up in April. You can find it at bit.ly/junkdna mystery school. And I would love to see you guys there because you have amazing questions. And yeah, it's going to be a really, really fun experience. We have special guests and everything, so it's going to be really, really fun. And if you're interested in joining this new mystery school that I'm hosting called Know Thyself, just reach out to me through a message. Again, it's bit.ly/junkdna mystery school. It's just a quick little handle. That'll get you right to the page to sign up. Free 4 sessions. And yeah, I'm really excited. I've been cultivating this behind the scenes. And it's going to be an amazing experience that you definitely want to be a part of.
All right.
That sounds really cool. I'm very interested.
Yeah, definitely reach out if you have any questions or you want a direct link. I could shoot that over to you.
Yeah, if you could send that, that would be great. I was trying to write it down, but I didn't quite get it.
I'll drop it in the Mystery School Lounge if you guys are a part of that, so you can get a direct link access. But again, it's completely free. It's going to be every Sunday of April, and we have guest speakers, really, really amazing topics, and it's going to be really fun.
I'm looking forward to that. That sounds really cool. Thank you.
Or on Instagram, too, if you want to reach out to me there. I'm going to be coming back online. I have a lot of exciting announcements to make, so if you're not following me at Junk DNA, please do. Also follow Pausa Meditation Studio, Clara, that spoke tonight about Lemuria, and then our collective business at The Quantum Light. We would love to see you there. We have so many surprises coming up for this year, and we'd love to keep you involved. As well as the New Templars. Thank you for hosting us, Scoob. It has been an amazing conversation. And if you guys have any further questions, just reach us. Be happy to answer them.
Alrighty, guys. Have a wonderful night, and we shall see you next week. Oh, let me redo that. Come on, what are you doing? Oh, wow, you're just not going to work now, are you? Nope, it's not going to work now. Of course not. Hold on. Try this.
Thank you again. Have a good night, everyone.
Yeah, you too, as I try and figure this out. It's too late. Everybody's gone. You guys have a good night. I will see you next week. Junk, you guys were awesome. Thank you so much for taking the helm.
Yeah, we got it. Ancient Lands is going to be a great series. I can definitely sense it. And hopefully we get the crew with us next time.